All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Leadership Talks. I'm Paul Ragusa. I'm the editor with Security Systems News, and I'm excited to have Ray Coulombe with me, and he is the managing director for Security Specifiers. Hi, Ray. How are you?
I'm doing well, Paul. How are you?
Great, great. And thanks for joining us. And if you don't mind, if we could start, can you tell everyone more about Security Specifiers?
Sure. And hello, everyone. Thanks for joining the webcast here. I'm sure I know some of you, probably not all of you, but Security Specifiers, which is now about 6 years old, was something I started a while back to help the industry better connect with the security consultant community. The average security consultant influences about $3 million worth of security product sales per year, so they matter. But it's a group that is rather diverse, all the way from sole practitioners up to large A&E firms, and somewhat difficult for people to get their arms around, and in many cases difficult to understand. So we've been on a quest to make these firms and people apparent, what they do apparent, and to assist the interaction of manufacturers and integrators as well with this specifying community.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. I thought a good place to start would be, cybersecurity. Obviously, that's on the top of everybody's mind. Can you talk a little bit about where does the security industry in general stand, when it comes to really getting it about cybersecurity? Are we getting there yet, Ray?
Well, that really is the million-dollar question, Paul. I compare what's happening in cyber in some respects to the way that IP technology developed in our industry. At the start, it was a novelty. A few people dipped their toe in the water. Gradually, more did, and ultimately there were events like the introduction of the IP camera that really forced the industry to embrace IP. And here, while it's not a single vendor that's influencing cyber, it's more dictated by events. When you look at the WannaCry virus or Mirai virus, things of that sort, that have affected our industry through surveillance cameras and through other security devices, you realize that we're part of the problem, and we also need to be part of the solution. So if you look across the industry through all of its sort of factions, whether they be manufacturers, integrators, consultants, end users, whoever it might be, I think that as a whole, we're in a learning process and an early growth mode. We've got a long way to go. However, the recognition, I think, is there. The action and responses are a little bit lagging.
Yeah, I agree with you completely on that. And what is interesting is everyone's kind of looking at the manufacturers now. Do you think the manufacturers are doing enough to cyber harden their products? And then, I have a part two to that. What are some of the things they should be doing before their products get out the door? But let's start with that first one. Are they doing enough right now?
Well, it's again, this is evolutionary. I think that some manufacturers are clearly doing more than others. There's some very good signs out there. Manufacturers are publishing hardening guides now, increasingly, or at least best practice guides for cybersecurity that will help people when they install those products to do it in a way that will hopefully maximize the cyber presence or posture of those products. But let's take a step back. As a manufacturer develops a product, and so many of these products and the vulnerabilities don't exist with the hardware; they exist with the code that's running on that equipment. And so right from the get-go, I think it starts with good design practice, and that includes secure coding. And I wonder how many manufacturers in our industry, really have formalized programs to ensure that the code that is developed is secure, that there are good rules around the coding, that that coding goes through a rigorous testing process and is really vetted before it gets released. And then along with that, you've got the updatability of the product. So how amenable is a product to getting updated, and how are the manufacturers then educating their customers about not only during the installation doing things right in terms of settings and good install practice, but then beyond that, it can be good on day one, but if a code vulnerability is discovered and there's a patch for that, how are those patches getting blown out there to the customer base, and what are manufacturers doing to sort of incentivize their integrators as well as the customers to perform those updates to keep their products up to snuff? So that's the part A. I think that, again, in summary, manufacturers are doing some things, some more than others, but there is clearly a long way to go. I mentioned the secure coding is certainly one partial answer. You want to make sure the code is as good as it can be when that product goes out the door. Part of that is penetration testing or vulnerability testing of those products. And there are a number of manufacturers I know. A couple of examples that come to mind are Linnell and Software House that do have regular programs of testing that code by an outside agency to make sure that it's good. Making sure that the documentation is up to snuff. Now, it's interesting. One of the protocols that can be used that's helpful in knowing what's going on in the network is called SNMP. And SNMP has been around in the IT circles for years, and every camera manufacturer I know has SNMP capability in their cameras. However, if you were to review the documentation behind those cameras, you find that there's very little mention about what it does, how to turn it on, how to use it, and there's no standardization on that protocol. So, having good documentation and something that correlates well with the product, and particularly as it might impact cyber, is important. I think another aspect is our password requirements. So I was at an Access event earlier this year where they've contracted with a firm or worked with a firm that has an application that sits on their camera that actually enforces good password and good certificate practice. And then also having good strategies, as I mentioned before, for updating that product as fixes come around, are all things that the manufacturer can do to help. I just noticed, by the way, yesterday I got a note from Hikvision about the fact that they're publishing or making available to government entities on the Hikvision website their source code for review by those entities. And I think we're seeing movement by Hikvision in that regard, and some of the things that they're doing, I think, should be emulated by others in the industry. So we're seeing activity even now as we speak.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Thanks for sharing that. Now I know security specifiers is all about the security consultant dynamic in the industry. Where are they in this discussion?
Well, I'd like to think that we're taking a leadership role, as many other organizations are. Organizations like SIA and PSA are a couple of notable examples. In fact, they're co-sponsoring with Reed a cyber secured forum in Denver in early June. But I think part of it is well, first of all, the specified community in general. Where are they at? I think they're a microcosm of what I described earlier. You've got a number of people across the board, some of whom are very capable, many of whom uh, probably have been in a bit of denial about whether or not this is really part of their responsibility. Uh, they're not cyber guys by nature, although the larger A&E firms have datacom and IT departments, and typically they haven't specified projects that embrace cybersecurity. Now, however, with a vulnerability that may exist in security products, if a consultant specifies something that is not cyber secure, could they have liability? And the answer is very likely they could. So
Yeah.
they need to understand and realize that now becomes part of their overall risk assessment and their assessment of what, in fact, they do specify. So we're trying to do a few things in that regard. One thing that was done actually a couple of years ago is that we led the industry effort to work with the Construction Specifications Institute, which publishes best practices for construction as well as a hierarchy of numerical codes called master format that help people who pull projects together properly organize their specifications. Within that hierarchy, there's a division that relates specifically to electronic safety and security. Some would know it as Division 28. And within that, while there are hundreds and hundreds of changes that were recommended and adopted, one very important change that sort of slipped in there as well was an element called cybersecurity requirements for electronic safety and security. So that element now is sitting there in this construction hierarchy. It's a number that people can use to specify cyber stuff into. And as I discussed this again at the Axis event, a lot of folks were saying, well, geez, well, what do I write? You know what? I've never seen a specification for cybersecurity before. Well, that's why we put it in there, because it didn't exist. But the fact is that we helped create that placeholder, and so along with highlighting the importance of cyber in the specification, we've got on our website, securityspecifiers.com, a number of resources. We have a number of real-time RSS feeds from some really interesting sources so that you can get up-to-the-minute information on things that are happening out there in cyberland. In addition to that, we have we put up a page, and we're starting to add links to manufacturers' hardening guides, which I mentioned earlier. So a number of manufacturers have them. A number of manufacturers that I know of are working on them and expect to have them shortly. But it's our hope to have a page that has a pretty comprehensive listing of those guides, and that's literally getting nailed up here as we talk. I'll probably have a few more up there this afternoon, in fact. Beyond that, I think whenever I talk or moderate a panel or volunteer to talk or whatever it might be, as I'm doing in the cybersecurity forum, I'm trying to edge more and more towards cyber myself. And even in the IT course I teach out at PSA every year, we've added a cyber element to that. I think that having just having a focus on it, and if whether you're the educator or the student, becoming more knowledgeable to either educate people better or to learn more is all part of it. It's like, look, we all have to learn IP terminology and networking technology and all of this if we wanted sort of long-term viability in our roles here. Cyber is another key part of that, and we're trying to help out with that.
Yeah, and I just wanted to point out, I've been really impressed with everyone in the security specifier community, the consultants, the specifiers, especially on the cyber piece. It's been great to partner with security specifiers with our specifically speaking column. I've been fortunate enough to meet a lot of really smart people that are part of that community. So thanks, Ray, for that. Now, moving on, before we get into any new initiatives that are going on, did you want to tell me any more about the just released draft of the cyber specification language?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that that people asked me after we sort of highlighted the need to start putting cyber language into project specifications. Started to ask, well, what do I write? And it became a realization that somebody really had to take the first step in putting that language together in the proper form that consultants expect to see, and that the kind of language that people on the receiving side expect to see in bid specs. So we took a first shot at suggested or even recommended language for such a cyber specification. So project specifications have typically have three parts. They've got a general part with boilerplate, they've got a product part that specifies product characteristic, and they've got an execution part that defines what contractors and integrators should be doing when they install a job. And so by taking that template and putting in some language around that, it's, for us, it was a way of starting the conversation. Draft 1.0 is on our website. It's freely available under a free license for people to take. We hope that people will look at it, embrace it, comment back on things that should or should not be in there, and to provide a starting point for consultants to look at, to consider in putting that into a project specification. So a couple of examples of that are show me the manufacturer's cyber hardening guide for the products that you wish to use on this project. And obviously not all manufacturers have those guides right now, but with enough of this language on the street, I think they'll get there, and that's a good thing. Or describe to me what your password provisioning strategy for this project is going to be. And we all know that in large projects, password provisioning strategies, if there is a strategy, are all over the place. So what, are strong passwords being used? What are the requirements for a password? Are unique passwords being used? How can they be updated? How can they be securely stored or securely transmitted? There are a host of issues around that many don't even think about at the front end of a project. What's your strategy for reporting on the assets that you've installed? So asset management strategy. What are the critical settings in a product? Be it what are the MAC addresses, IP addresses, open ports, locations, and so forth. Quite often, the clients or the customer is not even given that information at the end of a project. It stays resident on the installer side. And asset management is a key part of cybersecurity. So there are a number of things like that we put into the specification that people should review. And this is not anything that's formal. It's not a standard. There's no adoption to it other than what people might use and select from that could be of use in putting together a cyber spec. Because I think we start seeing project specs with a cyber element to them, then that is going to help force the cyber dialogue and better cyber practice in the new security projects that get installed.
Yeah, and that's a great resource, and that's right on the website already, so that's great.
Yes, it is.
Okay, and we have time for one more question here. What are there any other initiatives going on, security specifier initiatives that you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, we've got a big one. It actually started late last year with our Consult Technical Security Symposium. Now, right now, it's available to a limited number of manufacturers who are sponsors of security specifiers and a limited number of consultants. So last year, we had 20 manufacturers and 75 consultants come together for really critical discussions around topics of interest to the design and engineering community. Part of this was we've touched on here, cyber. And within that, we discussed consultant cyber liability. We discussed UL cyber requirements and other associated topics. This year, we'll be pursuing cyber and this year's event is going to be in November in downtown Nashville. But we'll be pursuing cyber. We'll be looking at technology elements, physical cabling, OSDP, that standard which needs to be better understood. We'll have some case studies, including one that has a title that I just love. We're calling it Securing Cannabis from Farm to Table. As it turns out, that little industry has some very specialized requirements. We've got a terrific speaker, Dr. Rita Singh from Carnegie Mellon University, who's going to talk about voice identification as the next major pending biometric in our industry. But they're all discussions. It's non-commercial. There are no booths. It's not a trade show. It's really something that involves a critical discussion on topics of interest to designers and engineers, and a way for certain manufacturers to get to network with them better, as well as to share their own roadmaps so they can do a better job designing into the future. And so it was a big hit last year, and we hope to expand that this year and certainly going forward.
All right, great. Well, that's all the time we have. So thank you, Ray. I appreciate it. It was great speaking with you.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you for the support the Security Systems News extends to us.
All right. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you next week.